I co-founded Rymedi with Dave Stefanich, who Nan mentioned, because I saw a lot of innovative technologies that could expand access to quality care not be combined in the right ways, right? Rapid tests and confirmatory PCR tests and getting the right cures to patients that needed them. So I used to work on partnerships to get all these players aligned to deliver the best outcome, and lack of trust in each other's performance of activities and in the data that they'd be holding each other accountable to kept a lot of these things from happening. So I went looking for the right partners in the blockchain technology space as it was maturing. And I found Dave at the time, CTO for a pharma manufacturer, using blockchain, advanced AI, and IoT to radically streamline quality management system in a factory. The controls of quality, the quality assurance, the regulatory compliance documentation, all digitized, all trustable because of the immutable audit trail that blockchain provides. I said, Dave, we could take quality management system automation out of the factory into the world of decentralizing healthcare. Or healthcare workers are in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, or a team of different clinicians are supporting remote care diabetics, or we need rapid response to a global pandemic that's moving fast, and pop-up testing activities by organizations that have never done it before. So we founded Rymedi. And I'll tell you a little bit more about us in a few minutes. I want to first introduce Dr. Delphine Dean. She's been fantastic to work with, a professor of bioengineering at Clemson, doing amazing cutting edge biomedical research on innovative drug delivery technologies at the micro and nano scales. And then on the side, somehow working with global health partners to make high quality medical device manufacturing affordable in Africa. And she'll tell you a little bit about how all of a sudden one day Clemson University, 22 to 25,000 person community, depending on the day, said, all right, Delphine, we do not have a CLIA certified lab. Set one up yesterday. And so it's been a joy working with her, having our technology support that rapid setup in all the ways they've been delivering care to not just the university and not just the town, but the entire upstate of South Carolina. Jose Arrieta will be playing talk show host and helping us kind of manage the conversation. He recently stepped down as Chief Information Officer and Chief Data Officer for the Department of Health and Human Services. I got to know Jose when he was a hot shot for building the first blockchain AI-based platform in the federal government to get an authorization to operate, to manage billions of HHS procurement across all these agencies and streamline more efficient ways. And he's saving taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars as a result annually, if not more. And he'll tell you a little bit about how when COVID hit, he acted fast and led the creation of HHS Protect, which is cutting edge blockchain, AI, IoT integrated, largest public health data sharing system the U.S. has ever had. And he stepped down. We're lucky to have him now on our advisory board as he pursues a number of different directions. So thanks, Delphine. Thanks, Jose, for joining us. And I'm going to pass the ball to Jose and have him direct the conversation from here.
Yeah, so first of all, it's an honor to be with you guys today. And I think that when you start to hear what Clemson University has done, I think one of the things that I've learned is they've really created the enablement of an ecosystem for modern healthcare delivery. And when you look at what they've put in place, powered by Rymedi, you're really peering into the future of how healthcare can be delivered differently, how you can do diagnosis at the edge, how you can collect data and provide diagnosis in real time on the basis of the data that you're actually collecting. And I just want to start by applauding the folks from Clemson who have kind of put this in place, because I do think it's a petri dish for a modern health economy that you'll see sprout up across the United States, and specifically because of the work that they did. So in order to get there, though, I think it's really important that we focus on kind of where they started. And so I'd like to open a bit with Delphine. And Delphine, why don't you frame for us kind of the challenge that you faced at the beginning of the pandemic as it related to this university. COVID-19 is untraceable at the moment. Really no kind of insight into how many folks have it, how quickly it's spreading, and talk a little bit about that problem set, right? And then Jason, if you could come in on top of that, I think it's really important to understand that in order to tackle that problem, you not only need to be innovative intellectually and think through kind of the needs that you have, but you need a platform that's going to create connectivity at the individual level. And I want to kind of bring those two pieces together, because I think that's what's really creating the foundation for Clemson to really allow us to peer into the future of what healthcare and healthcare delivery can be. So Delphine, if you wouldn't mind opening on the problem piece.
Sure. So I think, as Jason said, I do a lot of stuff in my research background, but I work a lot on designing medical devices, sensors and things for low resource settings in Tanzania and India, as well as here in South Carolina. And when the pandemic started, like pretty much around a year ago, as we head to spring break. So the university was open, spring break happened, and then basically we didn't come back in person from that. Around that time, the state put together these kind of task force to look at different aspects that were emerging from the pandemic. And so I was on the serological and diagnostics testing task force. And we started tackling the issue of making testing accessible and building up capacity in the state for testing, which at the time, really, we didn't have at all in South Carolina. There was limited number of labs that could run tests. And so kind of that's how I got into that space. And then, so I think by May, we started working with collaborators at University of South Carolina to work on saliva-based testing. I think realized that at the time, pretty much everyone was doing nasal pharyngeal swabs. And if you're going to do kind of nasal pharyngeal swabs are great for like, this person's sick, they're in the hospital, they're coming in, I want a diagnosis, I'm going to shove a stick up their nose and scrape their brain. But it's not going to work from a like surveillance, and there's a lot of risk associated with doing that. You need a nurse to be in the patient's face, and fundamentally, like, you can't ask a whole bunch of students to be getting nasal pharyngeal swabbed, at a regular basis. And I actually was seeing that firsthand, because we were starting to set up our IRB to validate the saliva-based protocols. And a lot of the validation data came from Clemson athletics. The athletes came back on campus, I think late May, June, and they were getting nasal pharyngeal swabbed every week. And then there was a delay, so they'd get swabbed and then they would get the results 48 hours later. And I think a lot of people on this call will remember when the athletics got back, they had kind of a mini outbreak, and that was due a lot in part to like a delay between when they were testing, when the results came back, and when they could isolate people. And so when we started collecting samples, also I was noticing like poor students were getting nosebleeds. I mean, it was, so from the testing side, I think we needed a better solution and something faster that would return, results more quickly. I think very quickly for the university, it became apparent that we needed something that had a lot of connectivity that connects to university systems. And I think Corey Caldwell was on the call somewhere. Yay, Corey. He was part of the team that actually determined, initially we didn't have a lab. And so there was this whole setup of how to internally be able to process all these samples. But that does take some time to set up. And initially we did not have the capacity to do everybody. And Corey's team actually worked on how to actually be smart about testing and sampling and being able to keep the infection rates relatively low, even though we couldn't do what we are doing now. And I think it was a big multidisciplinary effort, both at the university in terms of different people for different skill sets talking to each other, but then also involving industry and people with solutions that we could use. So yeah, I don't know if I can.
It's interesting because I think, a couple of threads that I think are fascinating. One, if you don't have visibility into the spread of the pandemic, into the spread of the illness itself, from a population health perspective, you're putting a lot more people at risk, right? I think the second piece of it is this really focus on the human. You talked about the athlete and the fact that it's creating nosebleeds, and those are really uncomfortable tests. And so if we're going to reopen our campus and educate our students, we really need to make this easier and easier to actually do the testing itself. And I think foundationally, those two objectives really allowed you to drive to the response that you got to. And Jason, I think it's important, and I kind of learned this in the HHS response work, that when you test and you create transparency and visibility, it truly changes human behavior. The more folks understand risk, the more it's communicated with them, the more transparency that you create there, it changes the way a community of folks behaved. And we saw this happen across the United States. But you can't do that unless the test and the data from the test, it can be shared, right? And so, Jason, I'd love for you to talk a little, take kind of the problem that Delphine framed, and talk about how your Rymedi is enabling that modern health ecosystem that's really allowing people to connect directly to data in real time as it relates to testing. Because I think it really creates a foundation of the future of healthcare delivery, powered by solutions like Rymedi and innovative folks like the team that Delphine was leading at Clemson University. So talk to us a little bit about how you thought about that problem and the importance of that connectivity in an ecosystem with tons of legacy technology. You had to fit into the middle of a spider web without breaking any aspects of the spider web. I mean, this is no easy task, right? We're not just, am I buying Microsoft Office and installing it on a computer and using Word? I think it's a little more complex than that. So talk to us a little bit about that.
It is on our side. Our goal is to make it as simple as possible for the end customer organization, right? So, we carry that burden that you just described. So I'll describe the response in two stages: prior to the lab being set up and scaling its operations, and then once it was set up. It took a little bit of time for Delphine and the team to get the lab set up. So, the University of South Carolina had opened and then shut down campuses around the country that were opening were shutting down within days or a week or two. And when Nan put us in touch with Clemson leadership, it wasn't just, it was, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Our scientists are telling us that we can open safely if we have at scale mass testing with enough frequency, right? Corey, you're one of those scientists. And so, but we've never done that before. How do we start? Who's going to staff it? Who's going to do what? So what were we already doing in market? We were already working with COVID diagnostic test companies and laboratory companies that are processing non-point of care tests. We were applying our connected health platform. And you can think of our connected health platform as having really two core layers from the end user perspective. One is the workflow application layer. So as I mentioned before, as healthcare is decentralizing, there's two buckets of problems. One are the people that are not all in a centralized clinic in a large hospital with the accountability that comes with that, are they all going to do their activities well? right? And then, and efficiently, ideally. And then the other problem is information about those activities reliable and trustable? And so we created the Connected Health platform to solve those two problem sets. One is cloud-based software workflow where what we were doing already with diagnostic tests is turning what we call dumb tests, analog tests, into smart connected devices, enabling someone to record on any mobile device the result of a test, automate reporting to different government agencies. If it was a test as part of a program by a large employer or university, get that data in real time and so forth. And similar kind of functions with labs that were setting up pop-up testing stations. Here you got a ginormous university that is like, all right, how do we start testing thousands of people daily? And so that's the workflow layer. And on the back end, we created it so that the data architecture leverages emerging blockchain, AI, IoT, edge computing innovations to make sure that the data is always secure and compliant with the highest patient privacy standards. HIPAA, GDPR, we go higher than HIPAA. The European GDPR system is, you see aspects of it in California's privacy law. We automate compliance with that, and then we automate making sure that the data meets the highest FDA or other regulatory agency standards so that that data can be relied on more for, to inform clinical trial design, for the kind of real-time surveillance that you talked about, Jose, at a population scale. So that's the tech side. So we started talking with Clemson and we're like, all right, well, work with labs, work with test manufacturers. We're a technology company. We're not a medical staffing company, right? But because of our work, we have partner staffing and clinical research organizations. So, we came in and said, all right, well, we've got some laboratory partners that'll process the tests until Delphine gets this lab set up. And then we can help staff the operations. And we know because of the technology, because of the cloud-based platform, we can have a bunch of people from Clemson and an outside staffing agency that has zero experience there within 2 days be testing thousands of people with high quality performance at every point in the activity, and super simple and easy for students and faculty because they register, they show up with a QR code on the Google or Apple wallet, it just gets scanned. There's a confirmatory question. What's the third letter of your last name? What's the fifth number in your phone number? Confirmed. Do the test, off you go. Make it as simple and easy as possible. Those specimens are being tracked if they're being processed somewhere. The results, when they're created in real time, go to inform either rapid response, helping someone deal with the COVID case, and then contact trace and or the analytics. So part of how Delphine, I believe we helped together bring cases down 95% at the university was the data side, was enabling when thresholds of cases in the dorm, or Clemson was doing an amazing job, one of the first in the country to track wastewater viral load. When there is reason to believe that there's a cluster in a dorm, all of a sudden, our software would know that you're a priority test case. Everyone in the dorm has to go get in a priority line, priority test, and your results in a few hours. And so they could help people quarantine and isolate more effectively, knowing that they won't be in their dorm for days waiting for a result. So it affects the health behavior. People are more likely to comply with best practices, Jose, because they know that the workflow is efficient and fast, and also that they trust that the organization is not being arbitrary. This is very targeted quarantine and isolating. And
it sounds like So Jason, if I may, it sounds like Delphine had this problem, right? You have students, they're dispersed across this campus. We really need visibility into kind of who has COVID-19 and who doesn't. And And we need to test them in order to do that and test them in a way that they're comfortable with. But at the same time, we need connectivity at the endpoint, and the student is the endpoint, because once we isolate the fact that somebody may have COVID-19, we need to understand who they've been around, and we need to create a notification for the folks that have been around that individual so that they can get tested and they can quarantine, and we can really drive down the case rate. You know, it's interesting, when I listen to you talk, I wrote this down as a note. It sounds like you guys have enabled, as a team, that you guys have enabled Clemson to become almost an autonomous, data-driven, AI-powered organization or university. And I think it's really important to point out that you've done that in a way where you've protected the individual's rights to privacy, but given them maximum access to transparent insight and data about a risk that they may be exposed to. And I think that's really powerful. Delphine, I wanna kind of pivot back to you. You know, you've watched this thing evolve, and I'd love to get your perspective on, you know, where you are today. When you started on this journey, did you realize that you were creating an autonomous, data-driven, AI-enabled university, that you were like beginning to create that? And kind of when you look at the differentiation of where you started and where you are, what's the thing that shocked you most?
Corey says tired. That's where we all are. I agree. We are a little tired. I think looking basically a year ago where we were and where we are now, I think there's a couple of things that I'm surprised at how it's gone on versus, you know, what I had expected, like say in May. I think the fact that we were able to, even when we had lower capacity, you know, Corey's team would identify kind of those regions that were more at risk. And then initially that's the batch of samples, because we could turn around the test results really quickly. That's what we would run. So those people would get, they'd know right away. And I think from a model that can get exported to other places, we have now this high complexity lab on campus that can turn around PCR really quickly. Someone was asking if it was a rapid test. So for those of you who don't know, we're doing saliva-based PCR testing. And we just set up the lab so the whole workflow is pretty optimized, and everything comes out because the intake and all that is all connected. It just goes very quickly, and we're able to turn around those results really quickly. And so now we have this capacity. I think the lab can probably run about 9,000 samples a day. On a typical day, we run about 4,000 samples a day from Clemson and the community. If you had asked me last year at this time that I would be running a clinical diagnostics lab doing PCR, I would have called you crazy. My background is in electrical engineering, computer science. Well, that's what my degrees say. But I think, but I'm in a bioengineering department and we've been working on this, and I think approaching it from the patient coming in to do a sample all the way to the resulting, and thinking about that workflow as a new thing and setting it up differently enabled us to kind of be more nimble than I think if we had started with large kind of data management systems that are maybe already in place for healthcare. And same, I think the lab, we set up the lab so the workflow just goes a lot faster than you would in a typical clinical lab, because we were looking at it honestly from like an engineering perspective of how to engineer rapid test results for this kind of high complexity test. So yeah, I think one thing that was difficult, and Corey probably from the public health side, to get everyone on board with this idea of testing everybody, and having repeat testing and kind of actually measuring the prevalence instead of kind of burying our heads in the sand and just measuring people who are symptomatic. that was hard to get people on board. And there are certain things where initially I was like, we could do rapid antigen testing, right? That's maybe less accurate, but it goes really quickly, but like politically and there are certain challenges. So there were certain challenges to overcome. And that's why we're doing PCR testing, because everyone's like, okay, that's accurate. So we're good with that. I think there was that side of things that I hadn't anticipated. I guess coming from the science side, you're like, but obviously knowing more data is better. And I think we've shown that, but I think last year at this time, well, maybe a little bit later once the pandemic really started in the US, that was difficult to get people on board with. And I think a lot of universities went with the other approach of like, we'll try to open, and then we're going to test people who are symptomatic who want to test, and they missed a whole bunch of cases, and then it blew up, and then they ended up having to close again. And so while their reported number of cases might be lower, their actual caseload obviously was much higher. And so, you know, we have colleagues at other universities that for spring semester did antibody testing, and over 50% of their student population had antibodies to COVID. Obviously, they hadn't measured that many students actually getting sick. So, yeah.
It seems like it's really a paradigm shift. And Jason, I would love for you to talk about some of how the technology allows for this, because I think it backs into some of the points that related to science that Delphine is driving towards. This is really a paradigm shift that with the right approach, you're not only creating transparency and visibility, but you're lessening the speed at which the virus is mutating, in particular in the environment and in Clemson, in the environment that you're providing a solution. And you're also collecting longitudinal insight and data as it relates to the virus itself, right? Because you have that time series stamping capability kind of built into the Rymedi platform. I'd love for you to just spend a minute and talk to us about, you know, why that's so important and kind of some of the opportunities that it could be branched into from a science perspective, because Clemson has gotten ahead and created this really great foundation that I think is an example, not only for other universities across the United States, but you know, for public health professionals at a federal level, at a state level, at a community level, because of the granular insights you can provide and that longitudinal data record. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I'll speak to the technical approach, and then ask Delphine to talk about from the scientific perspective, you know, all the potential that's unleashed from that. You know, what we do is we use our platform to make it safe and secure for organizations to share data. One, to collect data, store it, and share it in ways that beforehand they had reasonable risk concerns about, and therefore wouldn't do it, or would want to do it and would have general counsels get in the way. And so I spoke earlier about the HIPAA GDPR patient privacy component, which, you know, we use a combination of blockchain and public-private key cryptography and AI to essentially manage the in transit and at rest encryption of all the data elements. And so I want to
pause you for a second on the public-private key piece, because I think it's really important, you know, for everyone in the audience here. So is what you're saying when you're talking about public-private key, that not only are you creating an enterprise view for Clemson as a whole, but you're empowering the individual for an individual identifier, a private key, that would maybe allow them to consent and share additional data on adverse reaction insights. And so you're literally creating authority and decision-making capability for an individual while collecting the data that you need so that Clemson team can reopen Clemson with that public infrastructure. Is that right?
I was going to add to Jason's point, because there was a question. I think like Clemson faculty, staff, and students, the way it works is they register, they go get a test, that all goes in Rymedi. We post the test results that goes into Rymedi, they immediately get a notification on their phone to go look at their test result. So then as soon as the lab posts, they know. And then the data gets pushed to the CCIT system. So if they're positive, it, kind of, it's all automated that, the access to building turns off. The student health services or the faculty side calls the positives. So all that happens at Clemson. Community testing, because we had this platform that Rymedi was doing, we were able to pivot and when we had the capacity, start offering community testing. But obviously, as you pointed out from the legal point of view, if it had all been internal to Clemson, we suddenly would have had this big can of worms of like having a community test person's medical data at Clemson. So that's the community data goes through Rymedi, and they get a call, and then it gets pushed to community doctor volunteers. So Clemson University as a whole doesn't actually have access to that data. And so it keeps the data bucket separate, and it makes it easy to kind of incorporate other groups in. But sorry, like someone had asked, I was trying to.
I think that was really helpful. And one way of describing that is it's need to know based access to information.
Yeah.
What subsets of information does, and so that to Jose's point about the public-private key cryptography, rather than like the old days of deciding like, all right, we're gonna have a few different buckets of data sets we're willing to share with more or less role-based permissions, I can give 100 different entities, 100 different cryptographic keys to 100 different combinations of subsets of information, each of which are valuable in different ways for those 100 parties, none of which are easily combinable with lots of stuff to either be a patient privacy risk, or importantly for organizations to reveal valuable trade secrets or other kinds of intellectual property. So what we're doing is we're making it safe for organizations that might have had liability reasons, from we don't want to give our secrets to competitors to we don't want to get fined or sued for patient privacy violations, to share only what's needed to, so for example, we automate the reporting to the state Department of Health, and additional reporting to HHS at the federal level, CDC, and other parties. And frankly, if a test, you're actually, Clemson's close to the Georgia border, right, Delphine? So if we were to expand the community testing like 30 miles, on the other side of the lake, and those tests were gathered on the Georgia side of the border, but processed in your lab, because of the geolocation identification when the test is gathered, our system would automate reporting it to Georgia, not South Carolina, right? So need to know based reporting, permission, access to information. So you make it safer for parties to be willing to share more. And part of what the same cryptography allows, and this is what Jose, Delphine, Corey, and others we've been beginning to talk about, larger scale COVID research efforts that connect the dots between not just lots of things going on here, but nationally and internationally, is what sometimes is called sort of federated learning or federated machine learning, where you can have AI machine learning engines mining data across lots of different subsets without the organization behind the algorithms seeing the underlying data. But the cryptography provides what we sometimes call zero knowledge proof, because I don't know what's there, but I have cryptographic proof that the analytics was run on whatever was there and the entirety of it. And you can also train machine learning and other models that are trained across data silos without needing to have organizations bear intellectual property or patient privacy risks. This is a revolution, and COVID is accelerating organizations and innovators coming together to try and put what was already technically possible, but the urgency it has driven actual real world implementation. We're very excited to be doing this with Clemson and extending these partnerships to other universities right now. And one final point on this, Jose, you mentioned earlier the individual identity piece, right? So the anonymous, cryptographically managed identity that gets tied to a particular specimen sample or to a particular report, et cetera, that's issued. We have consents, the software gets consent for, public health reporting of your data, according to legal standards and de-identified usage and research and so forth. But we have consents that allow for, well, hey, would you like to play a more active role in research? We can come back to people, and we're beginning to do that, not in the university setting, but in the broader community setting, not just with Clemson, but with other customers, because people are eager to play what little roles they can to fight this pandemic and try and save lives. And we can connect the dots. We even have one of our customers is a vaccine developer of a novel platform technology. The vaccines are going to need to keep up with all these strains, and they're developing a vaccine, and because of our technology platform, they're like, hey, Rymedi, can you guys help us get some former COVID case samples? We don't want to know the identity. We just want some general demographic information so we can help develop our vaccine. Our platform allows us to then reach out to people and say, hey, would you like to contribute? And then Dauphine, I think your lab helped process centrifuge some of those samples, which now are helping accelerate US government-funded development of a next generation vaccine that'll keep up with lots of strains as this advances.
Wow. And, I'm not saying that Clemson would go into this space by any means, but it sounds like with the set of capabilities you put in place, you could start to do genomic sequencing on the genetic structure of the pathogen itself at a zip code level within the areas that you're collecting data from, and really start to simulate maybe even how the pathogen is mutating over a period of time based on environmental conditions. I mean, to me, and I'm not a scientist, and I don't even try to play one on TV ever, but to me, that sounds like a transformational change, not only in the way that you diagnose, but in the way that you buy antibiotics, if you're a physician's group, in the way that you interact with patients. You can now create value for that individual by allowing them to consent to sharing data. Maybe it helps them cover a deductible. Maybe it's a health token. That's really fascinating. I see in the chat over here that someone says that Randy Martin is on the call and that we should ask about the important role of CCIT. Now, I know I don't know the Clemson community that well, but I've noticed that they're very flexible. So I'm gonna throw it out there. Randy, if you're on the call, would you like to maybe share a little bit about your role and how you engaged as it related to this effort? Because there's some folks in the audience that are interested in that.
Sure. Really, our role was really to curate the data and create some of the applications that use that data to do some of the automation. So my team in particular, we actually built a database of the Rymedi results that get sent to us automatically. We gather that data, and that in turn feeds into the analytics side that Corey and his team used to actually do the prevalence testing over the last year. And we also look at that data and automatically look for positive results and try to get that to the medical team as quick as possible. We built a case reporting system where those positive cases get automatically generated. We also built a clearance system. So immediately when a person's positive result comes through, we automatically terminate their badge access to the main campus buildings just to help keep people safe. So we primarily are just enabling all of the other technologies that are being used to fight this disease.
Randy, as a technologist, I find that fascinating, and I'm going to make a comment here. So you have a group at Clemson who has figured out a way to push case count down as it relates to COVID-19. They used a modern technology in the Rymedi platform that was flexible enough to allow you to innovate within your existing environment and build new applications to literally change the way you interact with a whole bunch of students, right? And even the broader community. I mean, that is really impressive. I think if you would have, here's one follow-on question. Randy, if you were to try and do that non-pandemic without the Rymedi platform, building out some of those applications and capabilities, would it have been easier or harder? I know you would have got it done, but would it have been easier?
Yeah, this would have been much harder, and we were involved even before Rymedi with some of the other testing strategies that we were doing. We had lots of data integrity problems where we would get the wrong type of data just because there weren't checks up front to make sure the data was entered properly. So just doing that self-enablement where the user can actually enter their own data, that cut down on a lot of the errors that we were seeing up front, and which delayed a lot of the medical care to be as responsive as possible. So just the Rymedi system really just enabled the data integrity part and also the flexibility that we needed, because occasionally we'd say, I wonder, is there a way we could get this data? So we would ask Rymedi. We had a way to talk with them real time to talk to the developers, and they were super responsive, which is very rare in the IT industry. Usually you would have to submit a ticket. You might get a response 24 hours. I mean, this is near real time. So we would ask something, we would have an answer maybe 5-10 minutes after asking the question. So it's really just the flexibility of the platform and the responsiveness that was really key to our success.
Geez, it sounds like Clemson has really almost created like an innovation hub that could be very transformative for the community from a healthcare perspective. But I even think beyond that, an extension into other models for delivering outcomes for citizens as well as business outcomes because of the controls and the security as it relates to data sharing. So I want to pivot, and I know some of the folks in the audience definitely want to ask questions. So flag for me when we should open it up. But before we do, I think it's really interesting to have this group of speakers. So maybe Delphine and Jason, you guys have literally created this ecosystem enablement that could fundamentally change, I think, the community and probably the state and even broader at a federal level. Talk to us a little bit about the future and where, what different applications you may use the Rymedi platform to maybe push into the future of healthcare delivery, of clinical trials, different things that you're thinking about. I think that would be really interesting for the audience.
So I think for us, you mentioned some of the things we're starting to work on in terms of doing sequencing and strain analysis of some of our samples. I think one of the things that has been nice, because we have all this sequential data, we're seeing things that you kind of read about in the news, but like we have it right in front of us. So for instance, we're seeing people who previously had COVID get COVID again. We are seeing viral loads in our sample increase and things like that, where we can start tracking and sequencing those specifically so that we can look and see, like, is it that there's a new strain that's emerging? As people get vaccinated, if some of them get sick, is it just, vaccines aren't 100%, or is there like a particular strain that every time they get sick, that's the one they're getting? So those systems we're putting in place ahead of, obviously not everyone's vaccinated yet. So I think initially the way it would have worked is like you wait, a bunch of people are vaccinated. Oh, some people are getting sick. Maybe we should set up something to sequence those. And then like we're doing that now, right? Ahead of actually having people having people actually fall into that case. And because of that, we're also trying to innovate on sequencing is expensive and slow, and innovating on having kind of monitoring more like PCR and rapid-based strain analysis tools that we can just every day run our positives on that, see if anything pops of like, oh my gosh, there's a new strain maybe, and we should actually start sequencing and sending samples. And so I don't think we would have been able to do that, like just being a lab with a lot of capacity, without having tools to kind of monitor our data and methods of kind of reporting when we have things happen. So that for sure is something moving forward we're doing.
It sounds like NIH should take a hard look at pushing some research dollars down to Clemson. It really sounds like you're in the middle of creating the future. Jason, I'm going to kind of change the question after listening to Delphine's response to you. And first of all, you're blessed because you have an amazing customer. I mean, a customer that really understands the space and is open from a technological perspective to using new technology. And I don't know everybody on the phone, but Randy and Corey, your openness really made this possible. And I think it's important to point that out, the collaboration across the board. As you learn from this customer, Jason, how do you see the Rymedi platform changing, right, to enable some other activities that maybe Clemson University wants to engage in, but maybe some of your other customers want to engage in, or maybe businesses in the local community at Clemson want to use this capability to build off of? Because it really seems like an enabler.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I'd say one of the biggest learnings from collaborating in the large scale mass testing implementation is the importance of software workflow controls, making it easier for people that, someone's sick, someone has to sub the shift, right? And making sure that CNA or nurse practitioner who's new to overseeing some process, right, has a quicker, easier time following protocol, and that information about that activity is being captured, and that those workflows be configurable in modular ways. So it means on the tech side, a lot of design thinking about how to, we can't customize for every different potential space and use case. So what's that sweet spot in configurability to different kinds of workflows while maintaining at the application layer the same scalable core product? Whereas on the back end, the data architecture is the same for all these different use cases: vaccine administration, laboratory processing of tests, clinical trials, and so forth. I can't yet speak, Corey, right, publicly about some clinical research that is in motion. There'll be some announcements coming soon. But one of the benefits, Corey could speak to this. One of the benefits of already having Rymedi deployed across campus is for a place that's not experienced in doing clinical trials. Corey's, talked about how it helped him and his team make the decision. Yeah, we can participate in this stuff. And then in terms of other organizations, as a result, the infrastructure makes it easier to. We're already capturing data. Students are already used to workflows, and staff are used to workflows. So, getting a bunch of people to say, yeah, I consent to be in a trial, and that workflow is just a little different. Right? It presto. Now you're what the clinical trial people call it's a site and research subject management solution. But some other universities that hadn't been running on us, Corey made some introductions because they were also new to trials, and oh goodness, how do we make this work? And one of the benefits that seems to be emerging there is the workflow controls and efficiency helps us call up staffing and CRO partner organizations, just like we did last fall with Clemson, and get staffing to step in and do things that these places aren't equipped for yet, with confidence that they'll be done right and more efficiently. So one of the exciting lessons from Clemson is we're doing things with a third or a quarter of the staff that other universities or pop-up testing places are doing. And so in making, for a place that's new to trials, making the budget work right? I don't know, Corey, if you have a word or
Yeah.
two to say about that.
Right across, I think it's super well said. The only thing I would add is, and maybe this is to Jose's point, I love this ecosystem concept that you use to kind of like encapsulate everything. That's exactly right. And without Rymedi and without Delphine and her team and everybody, these teams, there is no ecosystem. And the ecosystem, whereas it's been really hard to create it on the fly and we're all pretty exhausted, that's why I said we're all tired, that's what we all are. These things will like live on. And this ability to, I mean, even just the ability, that's why I wanted to tag Randy and Dr. Cross, like the ability for us to work together, for CCIT to work with another health technology platform is like kind of remarkable, right? Like there's usually these turf things. And I think we kind of got out of each other's way because we realized that there were actually lives at stake. And this has been I'm like the message guy, I'm the megaphone guy. Like, you know, the virus is here, whether we pretend like it is or not, all these like little things that I like to say. This ecosystem thing falls into that for me. Like,
it's a fascinating point. I do work with DoD since I left government, and it goes to one of the questions, and I know Delphine wants to answer this, but I think it's important to frame it. You know, there's large scale propaganda efforts by rival nations focused on messaging to the United States right now to exacerbate some of the health equity issues that you see happening across the United States. I mean, that's happening globally. We're the largest recipient of it. And what I find fascinating is your ecosystem, not only is it enabling testing and vaccine management, but it's enabling civic engagement. It's going to enable civic engagement in a secure manner and connecting people in the local community to one another. So the message that they're getting is not the mass message pushed through those large platforms. That same ecosystem can be used from a security perspective to power the security feeds, cameras and feeds that you have within your ecosystem. So I love the fact that you guys are thinking about it from an ecosystem perspective. Delphine, the health equity issue is a huge issue, right? And I've been working on this. Talk to us about that. I'd really love to learn, like, how can you use this platform to address that issue? Because that's a major problem around the world and in the United States.
So I think, and that was basically since I started working on for COVID, that was my biggest thing, having worked in other spaces about accessibility to healthcare. I think the thing that has happened with this platform is that, for instance, we have vans that are going out to underserved communities up in the upstate, and we're talking to other places so that you can go just take a van, do testing, it connects to a cell phone. You know, not everybody, but most people have cell phones these days, and it makes it easy. They don't have to log into complex healthcare database systems ahead of time. It's fast. And then people will get their results, and then someone can call them about their result. And so it makes it a little bit more nimble. You know, they don't, you can just go in, do testing, people get their results. And so we're able to outreach to places that otherwise wouldn't have testing options, really honestly, nearby. And I think with the vaccine moving forward, that's actually one of the things that some of the colleagues in public health have talked about, is like, we send the van, do some testing, and then when the vaccine is available, send the van with testing and vaccine, and people have seen that the van's there, and you know, they trust the van, go to the van, get your vaccine or your test. I think that the one, I will say, the disadvantage is there are some you know, of our population that do not have cell phones or email addresses and things like that. But we have worked out basically how to register someone. It doesn't take very long. You know, they have a phone number. So as long as they have some way to get contacted again, it's been working well. So I think for me personally, I've enjoyed the fact that, you know, we've been able to go out into the community further out than just, you know, Clemson proper, and actually help people outside of that space. The other thing that I think is nice from the data management system is that we can look at things like, you know, prevalence rates with different groups, prevalence rates by geographic locations and things like that really easily, and kind of put things in place quickly to address health inequities, because they're staring at you in the face with the data, right? You can't, you can't just like pretend it's not there when it's like on a dashboard in front of you. So, so yeah, I think that has really helped.
So it sounds like Clemson has uniquely positioned itself for some of the CARES Act funding that's being invested in creating modern 5G ecosystems in rural communities with a very flexible ecosystem enabler. So it sounds like there's a lot of exciting things going down there. Hey guys, I'm going to stop talking and just open it up to the folks that are on the call to ask questions. I mean, you have some folks that have some real world experience here. And you're in an environment, especially if you're around Clemson University, where I think the business environment's going to change because of the foundation that Clemson University put in place. So please, while you have a moment of time with these folks, ask, you know, pop on and ask some questions. I think this is a very unique opportunity to engage.
There's a question.
Do you see
Yeah.
Karen's question too?
Yeah.
Just to make sure.
Yeah, how weekly appointments. So for testing on campus for students, faculty, and staff, there's like a thing where you can schedule your test every week. If you miss your weekly test, on day 7, you get an automatic email. Currently, that's how that works. You get an automatic email that's like, hey, you haven't done your test. And I think day 10, you get another automatic email plus a phone call saying you still haven't tested and your access to the buildings is cut off. So that kind of ensures compliance. The testing site, the main one on campus currently is at Memorial Stadium. It's at the football stadium. And the community testing site in Clemson City is at Nettles Park. And that's kind of like almost like a drive-through testing site. People don't need an appointment. They can just show up. So if anyone on the call wants a COVID test, we're at Nettles Park. Rymedi's there collecting samples from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. Every weekday. And then, yeah, so that's kind of in the fall, because we couldn't test everybody, when your number was up, when you were selected, whether it was randomly for surveillance or because you were in a targeted group that was called up, they would send an email and be like, come get tested during these times.
In my experience as staff in Greenville, I missed my test, and the next Friday at 3:30, I tried to enter my building and I was locked out already. No email, just see ya. So I'm getting my test this week.
Yeah, good job.
Sorry, Nan. You can look now. You have the face to blame for that.
All right, now I know who to call.
I think there was a question about like Estonia and how there was advanced analytics and things like that in Estonia, but they were still having problems because of citizen behavior. And I think on campus, obviously we have a lot more, or you know, at any of our like Greenville sites, right? You're an employee or a student. We have control over whether you have access to buildings. You know, HR will call people and you know, terminate things after a while if you don't test. So obviously that's a knob for the internal. I think for the community, having access to testing where, so if there's a positive case, the doctor will make a follow-up call. We have a team of really dedicated volunteering physicians in the community that are doing the calling of positives in the community because they think it's important. But I think the fact that we can run this, the people get their results on their phone, it's their result, you know, I think it helps empower individuals in ways that if you go to the doctor's office and have to schedule your test, and then, you know, you're waiting for a call from the doctor's office, but you weren't there, so you missed the call on your phone, right? There's a whole thing where it's hard for people. And also what was happening before with some of the testing is it was just taking like 4 to 7 days for people to get their test results back. And so it was, you know, people were like, what's the point at that point? So I think having these kind of fast turnaround, very accessible results does empower people to feel like they can say something about their health system. And then I know from the city government of Clemson, they are looking at the COVID rates from the community sites, as well as the wastewater, the data from the wastewater analysis, and using those numbers to make policy decisions about mask mandates and restaurants and bars and capacity and things like that. So they are using the data to actually make these things. And so I think having everyone kind of trust the data, but then also having individuals have access to their individual data really quickly, and kind of with the privacy concerns allayed has helped a lot. Yeah, and same actually on the community side, the community doctors not only volunteer to call positives and things like that, but they've been big advocates for testing and using the data and so I think that, you know, when you have doctors who are respected in their community speaking up about these things, also that's helped. So I think the partnership with the local community, having everyone kind of have access to the same things that the university people have access to, because they've seen it work. We dropped our numbers, and then opening it up so everybody has access to that same kind of facility really helped with trust for the community.
I tell you what, after listening to this talk, I think I'm going to find out what town Clemson is in, and I'm going to move my whole family there because it sounds like it's the place to live. Do we have any other questions?
Well, I've got to thank the Rymedi team and Dr. Delphine Dean for showing up and showing out. This has been great, and love meeting some colleagues that I didn't know were involved in the effort. Thank you for coming. And this webinar will be posted on the Center for Corporate Learning's website by Tuesday latest. Typically it's there Monday. Please share because I think this is information a lot of us can use. Thank you so much, Rymedi. We love you.
Well, thank you, Nan, for having us and for setting this up. Thanks, Jose. Thanks, Delphine.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
This was fun. All right. Bye.